Congress who will be in the middle of it all is Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley. He serves on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. Let's start with Rudy Giuliani because the subpoena went out to him yesterday. What do you hope to learn from the president's attorney?
Well, first of all, we also subpoenaed documents and had a friendly letter asking 3 of his associates to come talk to the Intelligence Committee. First of all, what was Rudy's role in this? And that's going to affect our legal proceedings as well. Was he indeed the president's personal attorney? Was he acting under orders from the State Department? Was he self-dealing? Was he working for the political campaign? And all that matters. Remember a week ago, I asked the head of the United States intelligence what was Mr. Giuliani's role, and he honestly had no clue. That's a horrible way to run a government. It's particularly dangerous, especially when you're talking about classified information. What was his role? What exactly was he doing? What exactly did he request from Ukraine? And did it conflate with all these other roles?
Well, it's interesting because as your committee notes in the subpoena, Rudy Giuliani admitted to much of what you just asked in an interview with Chris Cuomo. Did you lean on the Ukrainians for dirt on Joe Biden? Rudy Giuliani says, of course I did. Right? So many of the answers are out there in plain sight, correct?
Sure they are. To be corroborated and to go into greater detail. What else was said and done to muscle a country in a hot war with Russia at this point in time, occupied in Crimea? The balance of the country is facing the full brunt of the Kremlin playbook. So we muscled a country that was particularly vulnerable using the Justice Department. This is an extraordinary crime. I suspect this is the greatest crime a president has committed in my lifetime.
Well, you were alive during Watergate, so it remains to be seen. We will wait for the investigation before we make that determination. I do want to ask,
this is far worse than Watergate.
What happens if Rudy Giuliani does not comply with the subpoena?
Again, it gets extremely complicated because we're not sure which role he was taking. In the final analysis, I suspect we'll probably need the courts to enforce the action. During Watergate, we always wonder, what if the president decided not to respond to the courts and say, no, I'm not going to, despite an 8-0 decision. Again, in our lifetime, we're facing that possibility, and that will be a true constitutional crisis. I am hoping that the fact that many more in the American public are starting to realize the crimes committed by this president, courts don't live in a vacuum. They must understand and appreciate the national security implications here and will force and compel this president and his associates to turn over relevant information and testify truthfully to Congress.
Obstruction was an article of impeachment for Richard Nixon. If Rudy Giuliani does not comply, if the White House does not comply with everything you're asking, do you see that as an avenue toward a specific article of impeachment on obstruction?
I think it was an obvious article already within the special counsel's report. But since that time, the president has continued to obstruct. And now that we know so much more about the Ukraine incident, it is going to be even more paramount. So I think the president continues to obstruct. It's the reason I came over to the impeachment side. The fact that the president disregarded the constitutional ability of Congress to oversee the executive branch. And I think more importantly, on the heels of the special counsel's testimony, the call with Ukraine takes place.
Right.
The president's never been held accountable for his wrongdoing.
The day after.
The day after. He says, well, I dodged that bullet. I can do something even worse. I'm immune. I'm above the law. If the public doesn't appreciate that, they must start to focus on the fact that this president never does anything wrong once. He continues his actions because he feels that it doesn't affect him.
Congressman, I want to ask you about something the Inspector General for the intelligence community wrote last night. And I'll remind our viewers that this is a Trump appointee. He was pushing back against arguments that the president has made that the whistleblower's complaints was hearsay and shouldn't be considered valid. The Inspector General says that he determined that other information obtained during the preliminary review supported the complainant's allegations. Other information obtained. What do you hope, and you have the Inspector General coming in on Friday, I believe, what do you hope to learn about this other information obtained?
Well, on my question, the Inspector General talked about how he corroborates a complaint that comes in. I think everyone in the room would agree that he's a straight shooter who is extremely thorough, who spent the 14 days he had to go into as much detail as possible to corroborate this. And I think, indeed, he did. What I want to learn from him is now that he can talk about this specific complaint, because, as we've said, the cat is out of the bag, what are the details of how he corroborated this beyond that which we already know? What concerns me beyond all that is, and I'm glad he's pushing back, is the president is inciting violence. He is also putting at risk what's incredibly important to the intelligence community. It operates in secret for a reason, to keep us safe, to protect sources and methods. But it only works in an open democratic system when we have a whistleblowing system, a pressure valve, if you will, and oversight by Congress. Otherwise, we've seen in the past what can happen. Two bad things. If the whistleblower system isn't working, leaks happen. And that's very risky to our country.
You're talking about the president's
wrongdoing.
You're talking about the president's statement about the whistleblower, that he wants to find out who the whistleblower is and that there will be major consequences once he does. Do you view that as a threat? And if so, again, does that in and of itself become an avenue for you to investigate? And could that ultimately be something in the discussion with articles of impeachment?
Absolutely. First, it is inciting violence. It is also suppressing the system that is so important for the intelligence community to operate. It is particularly dangerous on the heels of the president using the word civil war, talking about those who are investigating him. Listen, a president has the right, obviously, to serve out the balance of his term unless they commit high crimes and misdemeanors. That's not a civil war. That's the Constitution. President Nixon did not complete his term of office because he committed high crimes and misdemeanors. I think this president is as well. What's extremely dangerous is the fact that more Republicans aren't doing what Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger did, which is to speak out when the president says such outrageous, frankly, autocratic things.
Kinzinger said those comments about civil war were beyond repugnant. Mike Quigley, Congressman from Illinois as well, thank you very much for being with us this morning.